Welcome to the show today. I am really excited because today I have a very special guest, someone who I have been really looking forward to having a conversation with. My friend, Benjamin Christmas. We met on LinkedIn. We have ended up networking and making the same group of sort of really good connected friends. And it has been a wonderful journey together over the last several months, getting to know one another. And I have to tell you, I can't wait to share this incredible human with you. You guys are going to fall in love with Benjamin as much as I have, I promise. Stick around and let's get started. Hi, I'm Carole Jean, late identified autistic ADHD human, and your host of the Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show and Burnout Restoration Unveilers community. You're about to experience the new way to thrive as a neurodistinct brain and body by getting off the chronic cycle burnout loop for good. By unveiling your authentic self, defining what thriving feels like for you, knowing your burnout signpost, so those top 20 burnout warning signs are a thing of the past, and stepping into your best life as the creator and leader you are meant to be. Get ready, because this is where we go against the mainstream, say no to outdated self-care tips, and we say yes to who we are in order to create an energized, authentic, peaceful, and harmonized world. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain. Get started. Welcome to the show, Benjamin. I am so excited we're here today.
Hi, Carole. It's really lovely. I've been looking so forward to this. And I've just really appreciated your energy. It's awesome.
I think that's one of the things, like when we first started connecting and talking, like, caboodles months ago, it was just like, I don't know, there was just like this vibe, like we just connected. I was like, I like Benjamin. Yes, is my person. And we've had some really good conversations. But I think what's really beautiful is that through this whole connection that we've made on LinkedIn, and what I love is that there's this beautiful community that's really sprung up,
Definitely.
and it's so nice to see, like, oh, have you met this person? Oh yeah, I met them. They're so cool. And like, oh, I need to introduce you to this person. And it's just been so nice. And it's been really,
it has been
supportive.
and it's only come about really in the last, like for me personally, obviously in the last year, but just, I think it's only really come about in the last couple of years, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, really, I didn't even get, I was on LinkedIn, but I was like, I don't know. I wasn't really seeing anybody, like my people, until I joined and got really active, like back in March, I think February, March. And then it was like, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks to, everybody working from home and stuff, my people are showing up.
I know.
And
it was the same
and you know what I loved? It was really cool. Is like, and I think you were a really big leader in this in a lot of ways, because we had a couple of people misunderstand our ND communication on the LinkedIn side of things. And we had some people who were like getting their accounts paused, and, people like saying, oh, hey, this person is like not being nice or whatever. And somehow it was on us that it was our communication style. And it's like, well, first of all, we're having a conversation that we all get in our community, one to another.
On
and this
boards,
is a person,
on our profiles, on our stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've got somebody who isn't part of our cultural language and understanding, like interpreting this and then reporting us when we're just having a conversation, one person to another. And I loved how you really were elevating, like, hey guys, this is what's going on. Because, in our very autistic ADHD neurodivergent way, we're not always picking up on what's happening around us, because we're sort of focused on what's going on. And I love that you sort of raised that, and we all sort of rallied around, a lot of our mutual friends this year to say, hey, whoa, you guys have to recognize that we do communicate in a very unique way, one to another. And this isn't what people are interpreting it to be, who aren't even part of the conversation. And I love that you did that.
Yes. Yeah. And I something that I guess this is what leads into the topic, I guess, today, but also I've been for a long time very confused, like many of us, prior to a diagnosis. But a lot of the trouble I had wasn't so much communication. It was getting people to understand what I was communicating about. And that made it very difficult because there was a lot of opportunities in which I was just misunderstood. And I tried to then elaborate further, only to dig this proverbial hole even further. And exactly. And it made it would get to a point where it was very distressing because you didn't feel like you could talk, but it wasn't even about whether you could talk. You couldn't even express the very ideas that you wanted to talk about. And it was such a self-censoring experience. And you don't realize how much you self-censor with all the different aspects of maladaptive behaviors when you're undiagnosed and you don't know any better. You don't know any different, I should say. And that makes it very difficult. Now, I did explain to you prior to what I give you that little phrase. So one thing I guess I really enjoy talking about is just to elaborate on what I think is some complexity that hasn't necessarily been touched on. It's a too hard basket, not even going there, and we'll just leave it for another day. Now, one thing I like to talk about the things that are hard, but not from the context of, right, everybody, sit down and listen. That's not what I'm about. It's more
No,
like,
you're not. You're more of a community conversation builder.
Yeah, like let's all talk about it. And one thing, and let's talk about it and not be disrespectful. Let's all give each other room. And if there's a particularly hostile view, it's still valid. But if it's disrespectful or anything like that, there's no tolerance for that either. You know, there's degrees of nuance, but if you are heading towards a hateful territory, then that's not participating. And
that also just sort of shuts everybody else down. And then it's like, then anybody's scared to share anything. And that's not what we're after.
And it mutes the community collective voice. And that takes a lot of time to engage. Now, just as you touched on before, the neurodiversity community is finding its space. And that's probably one thing I'll touch on just a little bit later, which is the other concept I wanted to talk about for the neurodiversity sort of cohort. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is that our community, a lot of us are undiagnosed, a lot of us are late diagnosed. And there's a lot of individuals that are newly diagnosed as children, have gone through life. I would, hazard a guess, and it's just a guess, that say 50% of that have grown up with diagnosis, have probably, maybe even more so, probably a much higher percentage than 50, were growing up in a very pathological biomedical model. So it was very much, you're autistic and you will not be able to do X, Y, and Z for the rest of your life.
Yep.
Now, if I had been told that, I would have probably been the type of person to say, bugger that, I don't believe any of that, and I'm going to go do my own thing. But
I would have been like, well, I'm just going to prove you wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's just an autistic response as well. But
Totally.
I also think that there's a lot of vulnerability in those moments, and a lot of harm can take place. And I think this is why having a accessible neurodiversity community, doing what you're doing, Carole, awesome stuff, like providing spaces for people to talk, not just to talk. Like yes, if that's the case, but we do want to do something with it, which is like communicate to our own community, communicate to neurotypical community. But, even that sort of binary, I want us to move away from that binary because we're a neurodiversity spectrum. So getting to what I wanted to talk about is like these internal behaviors. Now, neurodiverse individuals, we love social justice. We love helping people find ways in which to work better. It's not about you did wrong. It's not admonishment, but there will be like a degree of admonishment if there isn't social justice moving towards a way that we feel is inclusive. But what about these internal behaviors that we perhaps are still trying to learn about ourselves as autistic people? What, we talk a lot about the accommodations. We talk a lot about the environment. And these are all fundamental changes that need to happen. This is all, and I do not want to negate the primary sort of foundation that needs to be established here, which is we need to address the hostile environment. And by environment, I mean the environment, everything around you, the culture, the physicality of the space, everything, the way it's structured. It's all structured around neurotypicality. And that's fine. Like now
it's
that we know
neuromajority accessible. And that's really the lens. And so it's like, oh, I have my needs met. So that means everybody else has their needs met.
Exactly.
And so then they don't move past that.
Yeah. And I think also, how do you know what you don't know? And this is another thing. It's like, well, of course, it's a neurotypical majority designed environment. We are a minority. And naturally, there's been many cases of that sort of majority way having been the most egalitarian. That was the only way we could get some things done to then diversify further. And that's why the neurodiversity community now is really coming together. I think this is going to bring about a lot of social change in the next 10 to 15 years. But one thing I do not want us to get too, I don't want it to be put on the back pedal, is we need to start really diving deep into understanding ourselves together. Like, not
see, you're totally speaking my language now.
Yeah, you get what I'm coming from.
I mean, I have the self-care plan from the inside out because everything we do starts internally. And the more that we can start to become aware of, and we become aware through reflection. And I think that's why I was so excited to have this conversation today, is because this is a conversation of reflection, bringing about awareness. And the simple awareness is where change begins. And it's not like you have to do anything. It's just knowing that it's there. Mm-hmm. It starts to shift naturally.
Well, that's a really good point, Carole, because with that sort of naivety, you're thrust into a world as, say, an undiagnosed autistic neurodiverse individual, maybe ADHD like me as well. Like, I had some complex mental health, neurodevelopmental differences growing up, and it was very hard. It wasn't an easy thing. And I had no opportunity at any point up until probably a few years ago now, but growing up, I had no opportunity to actually know myself on the inside because I was so reactive to the outside because of the environment, because of the way everything was structured. We were so heightened and ready to deal with whatever came externally our way because that's just how we survived.
Absolutely. I had this conversation the other day, and we were talking about this, and I said, look, you got to remember that as late identified people, essentially we have gone through our life in a survival, protective, reactive place. And by the time we finally learn that, hey, we're just wired a little, we're wired differently. So our perception's different. Our sensory profile is different. How we perceive and process the world is different. And you're not broken. You're not defective. And, but the story and the way the world has responded to you your whole life up to that point has been telling you in one way or another, you're doing it wrong. You hadn't figured it out yet, and you onboard all of this. And so you're living in this survival mode. And what happens is, I think this is a big part of the UnVeiling Method and what I teach, it's that we've not had the opportunity to feel psychologically and emotionally, environmentally safe to explore who we are. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in part of that, after that original and initial processing phase in late identification, we reach this place where like, okay, I realize I have mastered to the professional level of camouflaging most of my life. I've probably been on the chronic cycle burnout loop,
I know,
I'm
right?
describing
Yeah.
myself here. The chronic cycle burnout loop for
I
40
don't
years.
no. By all means, I thought that was me. That's fine.
Oh, okay. And you get to this place where you're like, okay, so I recognize that I have trauma and that I have like the lasagna layers of micro traumas and alongs with the big T's and the little T's, and it's all like sliding off into the floor, but I've managed to juggle it most of my life and I've survived. And now I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm going to peel off a couple of these masks now that I know what this is. And I'm like getting down to me, and you get a couple layers deep and you're like, I have no idea who I am really, because I've never had the opportunity to explore it. And I feel like that's so much of what you are talking about today is like stepping back and like allowing grace and space to just experiment, to play, to have an opportunity with yourself to figure out who the heck am I? Right.
And it's okay to not know. Like one thing that some people get stuck on is, I don't know who I am. And therefore, run away. And they're just like,
like somehow if I don't automatically know that I failed, or that if I don't have it all figured out, that I just don't get it.
And why do we have that feeling? This is what I'm getting at. This is a very little thing. It sounds like a small thing, but it's not. So with
it's that germination.
That's the germination. So I'm going to throw out the phrase, everybody. There's this little behavior that's not little, but I think it's a common trait with autistic people. And this is what I would love to talk about and start to evaluate more, is these behaviors that we have that are internally specific to a neurodiverse experience, a lived experience on the inside. This is not about us telling other people, this is what a STEM is, or this is what, I'm not talking about externalities. This is not what we're talking about. And this is for a neurodiverse sort of perspective. And anyone that is not neurodiverse to then have a really awesome insight. One thing that I've noticed for me growing up, I've had a lot of trauma in my life. Now, I think that word gets bandied about a lot, but it's also very much a word that needs to be used more, because that's generally what the case is. Now, my trauma, it can manifest in so many different ways, but one thing that I find with the neurodiverse experience is that we are socially justice orientated. And that is partly because of we don't want to see that the hurt and the suffering that's been inflicted upon us onto others. Now, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean when we feel that justice, that social justice, that internality sort of behavior where we strive towards something that could quite literally cause harm to yourself, your person? Why are we doing that? What is this all about? Now, people will say, well, it's birthed out of trauma. Yes, it is somewhat. It's maybe all autism. Yeah, maybe it might be the autistic lived experience. I think it's an amalgamation of things, and trying to figure out where it's coming from defeats the purpose. Let's actually explore what it is first. Like, it's like getting an asteroid hit the Earth and you're wondering, well, where did it come from? Don't touch it. We want to figure out where it came from first. No. It's like, well, we're wasting time here. So the phrase is the germination of obligation. And I'm going to say it again, germination of obligation. And it sounds like a cracked up phrase that's made up. It's made up. It's all right, guys. It's all right. I made it up. But why did I call it this? Because that's exactly what it is. One thing I've noticed my whole life was that I felt drawn to the needs of others. Consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, I don't know, like even maybe when I was sleeping, I was always, but this was very much an unspoken thing on the inside. It wasn't essential that I went, I need to do this for this person. It was a feeling, an internal sort of pulling towards someone or something, some task. It was that feeling that if I weren't to do this, I fail in who I am or who I want to be or who I'm aiming to be, or it doesn't fit with what I know now, but it doesn't fit with how people perceive me. Now, that's a big trap, that last bit, that last scenario, because a lot of us late diagnosis is people, we have a lot of trouble in late diagnostic, post-diagnostic periods where we're having to drop a mask or even realize that we've been masking. So for me, my mask fell off. It went and just fell off.
Just
And
one, or
people were
just
saying
like
to
all
me-
1,000 of them?
Yeah, like it was just so quick.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, oh, thank God.
Was it kind of
Like,
like, I think about it like shedding, like when reptiles shed their skin.
Yep.
And it's like you emerge like all fresh and glowy and new, and it's like, ooh, I can wiggle.
I felt like finally, like the gap between my internal and external self was a lot smaller, you know, and it was like, I'm finally getting to that point where I feel like myself. So like, what the hell is germination of obligation, Ben? Like, that just sounds made up.
I love it.
It
I
is.
love it. So dig into this a little bit and share with us what this is and what this means, what we should start kind of looking at or thinking about.
Now, this is more so an exercise, and let's have a look at it and let's see if we can generate some self-awareness around it and whether this is a problem for you or for anyone, or it's not so much even a problem. I don't want to assign any sort of pathological biomedical model stuff here. What I want us to do is understand that it's a tool, it's a gift to what we've been given, and it actually helps a lot if you use it in a way that is you're aware, because there's nothing greater than having something pulling you along towards something good. Now, there's this feeling that you might feel on the inside. It's like this, it's like in the chest here. And it's that little seed that you'll start to feel, and it can be with a stranger. It can be with a friend, a family member. It can be with a colleague, a boss. It can be with someone down the street you see struggling. It could be anything, any scenario, but it's that feeling, that little seed on the inside that will quickly germinate into what you're feeling now obligated to do, the task that you've started to feel that you needed to do. Now, this obligation can be pernicious because what it does is it negates any sort of autonomy that you have for yourself. Okay, that's the key part there. Why do I feel drawn to do something completely at the expense of myself, regardless of myself? Right? And a lot of this comes back to that social justice, but I think this comes first. And this is what people refer to with this social justice stuff as well. It's that internal pulling. I call it a seed. It germinates. Some people, for me, when I first picked it up, it was with everything. And you don't realize how exhausting it is because you're no longer living, you're being pulled to obligations every day. So your life now is, if you could imagine a puppet doll that's getting made and there's strings going out everywhere. That's how a lot of autistics feel. They're pulled
I call
along.
it my FBI string board, and it's like
exactly.
all the push pins and the string and the yarn going in, and it looks like a cobweb.
Stringboard. Yeah, you're a walking stringboard, and you're not actually you. Everyone's just pulling you to where they want you because you're obligated to do so.
And it's so interesting. I love having this conversation with you. I really do. There's this, because the minute you mentioned it to me, I went, oh, that lands. Like I have been there. I have experienced, I have felt this. And part of my journey and where I am now, that's no longer that same part. It does not overwhelm and allow me to lose my autonomy in my own direction anymore. I mean, I'm in year 3.5, entering year 4 of no shutdown, no burnout, no meltdown since I was 6. This is 40 years of chronic cycle burnout. And I didn't know this was possible, but it goes back to the awareness of that. germination of obligation that you're talking about. And I think what's interesting is, and I do think you're onto something here. I really do, Benjamin, because I think it's part of our neurotype. And if you think about it this way, because my friend Joe and I had this conversation last week, we were talking about this, which is like, I always love how all of our brains seem to like collectively move in a similar direction. Isn't it great? Thank gosh. But it's interesting because we were talking about different types of trauma and experiences and things like that, and just sort of how our wiring tends to play a part in that. And I was like, how I describe it is it's like an open loop that's just close enough, but it doesn't close or touch. And my brain is constantly seeking to close or fill that gap to close that loop, because then it's done. But my brain does not like things that are unfinished.
Exactly.
And as she described it as sort of the box with the lid open, and it's like you can push the lid down, but it keeps popping open, and so you're constantly closing it. It's like, get the dang duct tape,
And that's kind of what you're that relates to obligation as well. You're obligated to close that lid. I want to close it. And that's
I want to close the loop. I want to close the lid. It's like it's this compulsion that almost overrides all of your knowing, like your deep knowing of like, this is, like, I know this is not going to be good for me. I know this is going to throw me into burnout. I know this is more than I've got spoons and utensils in my drawer to deal with. But
I'll just do this
feel like I have to, or I'm just going to do this little bit. And then time blindness jumps up and bites you in the butt. And 4 hours later,
or everything will be fine if I just do this one task. Everything will be fine if I just do this one task. And then it's like, by the time you get to the end of it, you're still not fine. You've just been obligated to do it all.
So Benjamin, what are you noticing, or what are some of your thoughts around sort of when you're feeling, now that people are like, oh, I'm becoming aware of this germination of obligation that's existing in my life, maybe? What are some of the things that you've started to sort of, how are you internally self-talking in this?
Well, I guess there's two questions I think I got from that. And this latter part, I think, would be a conversation for another day with the self-talk, because I don't self-talk anymore. One big thing is that up here is tumbleweeds for a good reason. Like, I think when I need to, but I just do. I don't. And people are like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well,
Josh calls that being a jellyfish.
Yeah, jellyfish. Yeah, that's great. I love that analogy. That's a great. Like, for me, it's more so with this obligation stuff. When I first noticed it, because I have a very vivid internal world, and I go there quite often. I hadn't realized for a very long time the majority of my life was spent in what's called dissociation. And it's a hard thing to realize, but you can be despondent over it, or I can celebrate the fact that I have a very vibrant internal world where I can actually internally work with things and figure them out, cog them out, and design them. Now, like, what do you do with this germination of obligation now that you know it's there? Well, one thing I noticed was that the person or the people that I cared the most about would cause me the most grief with that obligation. And by grief, I mean pressure. Now, that pressure generally will come out in ways that is maladaptive and unhealthy. And it will come out in ways that is hurtful or just plain mean. And you'll be like, why am I like this? Like, I just want to, like, oh God, I'm just tired. Like, I just give me, that's literally what it feels like. And the person on the other end is like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is not an abnormal thing. Like, this is as in the request or the task or the need or the want, it's not out there. So why is this person reacting? A lot of it's because it's unsaid. It's unspoken, but it's also the fact that there's no way out of it for the person that it's happening to in that moment, because they don't know it's happening. They're just reacting to that consistent feeling of obligation against their own needs and wants. And that is a very dangerous dichotomy to live under for a very long time for some people. And the worst thing that you can do is allow it to keep going unsaid or unspoken about. Because as soon as you verbalize it, everyone starts getting a clearer picture, not just you. And for me, a big part of my trauma was making sure that people were okay. And I would
The
not be
fawning.
able to rest. Yeah, fawning. Fawning was all, I was all fawn. And but not just like, it used to be pernicious in the sense that I would actively take on the anxiety and the stress of someone having died because I haven't heard whether they've made it home okay. And why do I feel obligated to even feel that way? No, trauma. Yes, trauma. But what do I do about it on the inside now? Do I get rid of it? Well, you can't really get rid of it. It's you. But you can learn about it. And like a muscle that's been used a lot, you just want it to kind of atrophy a little bit and not be so much in control and reactive. And it's just poking out every time it needs to.
Yeah.
When I
Like
started
for me,
to
I had to
realize,
interrupt it. When I started to like consciously interrupt it, then because it had become a habituated way of thinking and feeling, you know, because our brains do two things. Number one, it seeks to keep us safe. And number two, it seeks to conserve energy. So it habituates and automates as much as possible.
yes.
And that even happens with our thoughts. And our brain,
is.
our mind doesn't differentiate if this is something that's serving us or not. It's like, oh,
like
we've done this a couple of times. Let's automate it, because then, you know, if we've done it a few times, that means that it's okay. And so now I'm going to make it automated so we're not exerting as much energy to do it. And it's just going to keep
people might
happening.
be like, Carole, what do you mean automate? Well, it's like it's a good analogy because that's essentially what it is. But say it's like passing the brain instruction map for this particular task to the body, and the body just handles it. That's how I would visualize it for me personally. It's like I don't need to actively think about it. I just pass it off to the body now, and the body will just do it and incorporate that task. You know.
Yeah.
And this is part of the obligation thing. Like that's another thing that we incorporate.
So Benjamin, I've got two things here that I noted down that I want to kind of like pick your brain on, because I love where you're going with this. I really think this is a helpful conversation. Number one is sort of, what's the context of trauma? Like, how do we put trauma into a context? How do we look at and observe or even integrate? Like, if so much of our life has been like this unconscious, unaware experience of trauma, like how does, you know, the context of trauma in obligation, what is that? How are you observing that?
I guess this feeds into both things with what I was going to talk about too, with the other item. But with this obligation matrix, let's just call it that. Now, in regards to trauma, which one comes first? You know, like, like it's like the chicken and the egg scenario. Let's just say that I think a lot of the things that we experience, particularly it's imbued with trauma. So we need to stop thinking of things as standalone things in of themselves in isolation. And I think that's the biomedical model, compartmentalization, you know, specialization, all that sort of stuff. Now, you asked before, like, how do we deal with this? And this is kind of the same thing. How do we deal with it? This germination of obligation, and how does it relate to trauma? Well, we deal with it by the obligation. We deal with it by talking about it and letting people know. So what I did was specifically with my companion and the person that my best friend, I took the time, and he also took the time to listen and give me space and have patience for me to try and get out this idea. And it was really hard the first time, because what I was doing was describing it as I was trying to get it out. And when I finally got it out, he understood. It was Ben, you know, like, I want to go for a walk. Do you want to come with me? And I would be like, oh, not really. Okay, yeah, let's go for a walk. You know, and it wasn't about Now, I will clarify in the sense that it's not about me deciding, oh, okay, whatever, I should probably go for a walk. That's not the scenario we're talking about. That does happen. What I'm talking about is if I don't go, I'm going to feel like a shit person. And if I don't go, that person's going to be disappointed in me. If I don't go, I'm not going to be able to do the things I want to later, and I'm not going to be able to relax. If I don't go, I'm not going to be able to get the tasks I want to do later because I'm going to feel bad about this. If I don't go, and it just keeps going. And that is all obligation. And a lot of it's unspoken and a lot of it's unsaid because you've put it on that other person as well. So it's not just that person. Sometimes people will play to it. Sometimes people will use it. Sometimes people use it without even realizing. Don't get me wrong here. But we are the ones placing that obligation. And we can decide to take it away or to minimize it. How does it relate to trauma? Like what? Well, trauma is such a big word. And there's a contemporary understanding of trauma, historical understanding of trauma. And I think you and I would both agree it's a multi-dimensional thing.
Oh, it is a living, breathing thing all in of itself.
It's its own like anthropomorphized, like crazy looking alien thing that constantly is growing different parts. We don't know. But we are all talking about it. And we all need to understand that we all have degrees of it. I'm not traumatized. How dare you? But yeah, majority of humanity is. Sorry to say, majority of humanity is. And the people that say that they're not, as in they haven't gone and got healed, like people that are healed from trauma and have gone through it will say, I did have trauma. You know, they will still note it. I still am working through my trauma. It's a life journey. So that's a person that's gone very far in their decisions on addressing it. There's plenty of people out there that say, I don't have trauma. What are you talking about? Guaranteed got some trauma there. But then
that's where I started. I was like, trauma,
yes,
having trauma. What are you talking about? Because I didn't recognize it. I had lived with it so long, it was my norm.
I was studying my master's thesis on trauma. Hello. Like I was doing a thesis on it. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is me. No worries. Oh yeah, you know. And then I had no deep appreciation. Like I knew you can know lots of things, but applying it internally, totally different story. And that's what makes it hard. And like, what do you do with this trauma? What do you do with this obligation? The first thing is let's bring on awareness to it. And you talk about awareness, and this is a very big thing in our circles. A lot of it is because many people aren't familiar with their internal selves as autistics. And I also have struggled with neurotypical frameworks with meditation. And I didn't understand.
That does not work for me.
Exactly. And this is a neurodiversity thing where we were taught our internalities, our internal voices from a neurotypical, pathological, biomedical model compartmentalized perspective. I'm sorry about all the big words, but that's true. And that actually
it was like, here's the deficit you have. That was it. That's how it was usually presented to us.
And then it's internalized.
Yeah.
And that's
it's like, I'm failing. I'm not doing this well enough. I'm,
yeah, it's so pernicious. And that minority stress is internalized. Then you have your obligation trying to alleviate that minority stress by making others comfortable. Others okay.
Everybody's comfortable but me.
Exactly. But then like that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's when you get burnt out people and tired people and people that end up suicidal, self-harming, because they don't know why they keep doing all these things. And a lot of it is just say hello to that internal self of yours. Getting familiar with that person. Know that that person is actually you. And that obligation you feel is not a bad or a good thing. It's what you do with it. If you're reacting just constantly to what people need from you and want from you all the time, and you're never giving yourself that, you need to have some obligation to yourself. And that's where it kind of gets back to being a bit more healthy.
I want to, you just, I love how you bring out so many wonderful little sparks. As my friend Laura and I say, we spark each other and you spark me.
Yeah.
Part of that too, from what you just said, is like, there was this time and this place in my life where I knew I had been living through obligation, and my belief system was saying, and the trauma in my life was telling me that I had to make sure all of these things were in place because that's what kept me safe. Right?
Yeah.
Making sure everybody else was people pleasing myself to death. And then I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I didn't know me. I knew that I hadn't. And I knew that I had to turn internally. But that was so scary. I was afraid because one of the things that came up, and it was hard to even verbalize it or acknowledge it, was, what if I look inside and I don't like what I see?
Mm-hmm.
What if who I am or who I've allowed myself to become, I don't like it, or I don't understand it, or it's, God forbid, I'm a horrible person, and all that stuff. And I think so many of us feel that way, and we're scared to share that. I'll get vulnerable. I'll share it, guys. I will. I will show up and be vulnerable all day long to help somebody.
And I think we're probably the minority in that regard, Carole. And that's okay. I love sharing, and it's never been a problem for me. But that also was part of my neurotypicality, neurodiversity, and having that degree of constant. So this is part of the obligation for me. I was so obligated out of myself. I became this external plate spinner for everyone else. And Ben wasn't home because he was plate spinning, and like,
I don't like those dang plates.
Yeah, and you will eventually burn out. It's not sustainable, but also because you have no degree of relationship with yourself. And you wonder why you don't understand yourself or who you are. And I want you to know, like, that is okay. There's nothing wrong with going, I don't know who I am. You know what? That's the best start, because that's the beginning of the journey of finding out who you are. Because as soon as you ask
if I had a button for like cheers, and I would hit the cheer button, guys, but I'm not that fancy on this show. So we're just gonna do our cheer here.
We'll do it ourselves.
Oh my God. Yes. So I think that brings us to a really good sort of part and component to this. And I think you're going to speak to this really beautifully. Part of the work that I do in the UnVeiling Method is, because this was part of, I have alexithymia also. So a lot of that, and through the trauma, it's like I would disassociate. I would disconnect with my body, and I had suppressed it for so long that I didn't even know how I was feeling, or I would have all these huge feelings all at one time. It was really overwhelming, and it would take me a long time to sort of process and sort through them. And sometimes it would be like stuff would show up years later. And I'm like, why is this hitting me all of a sudden? I'm sitting here running a bath, and all of a sudden, whoa, why am I all of a sudden upset over something happened 10 years ago? It's just hitting me. And, I think part of that is looking at and gaining a vernacular for our own, to identify our needs. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I have in the UnVeiling Method is I've created a form that it's a reflection form of needs. And it's like, okay, here are like some of the big need statements. Is this a need that's being met in your life? And it's like, oh yeah, because you can read it and you start to feel, and you're connecting. You're like, yeah, okay, I got that one. You're like, no, I don't have that one. No, I don't have that one. So that's identifying the unmet need. And guys, here's the insight here.
Even a need you never had an idea of.
Right, exactly. And you're like, whoa, if this is on paper, that means other people have experienced this or have had this too. So I'm not alone. And as you're looking at that, it's like, oh, and the insight is a consistent unmet need is what leads to burnout. Consistent unmet needs lead to burnout. And a lot of times too, once we start to recognize this, oh, I have unmet needs, and these are what they are. I knew I had them. I just didn't know how to put words to it. I didn't know how to sort of identify it. And then it's sort of Right. It is. And it feels like really gray and like your feet are never
Yeah,
on
like
firm ground
it's
trying to figure it out. And you're so busy, doing everything else in that external pleasing that you've missed this. But I think part of
mm,
that obligation part and the shift that I think you probably will speak so beautifully to is like once you start to become aware of and start to recognize some of these needs, then you also have to start digging through some of that stuff that we carry with us in late identified life. And it's like, I'm worthy of having my needs met. My needs are not a problem.
mm. I made a post about this on LinkedIn just recently, just about the child self. And there was a portion of that post that talks about how our internal selves will carry the luggage that we can't carry externally. The life's luggage, the things that we all carry stuff on our backs, right? And they're all external, these things that we carry on our backs as our person. But that internal child self will carry the things that are too heavy. And it's like, you need to think about that for a second. The child within is carrying the heavy stuff, and that's all, like, think about that. Why? That's unfair. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, well, that is you. You have been doing that. And you need to realize that a lot of the things that you're carrying externally, your child self is carrying internally, and the things that they're carrying internally is a lot more. The things that you've never been able to deal with, you've had to hide them away, pack them in a luggage, pretend they're not there. And I think with that understanding, when you start really diving into it, like for people, some have never done this, they don't even know what's a child self. I used to have such irritating sort of feelings come through when my psychologist of 10 years ago would say, well, you need to tell that to your child self. I'm like, what are you on about? Like, I never understood.
There's one of me in here. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And it's like, well, what do we do with all this? Like, it feels like a lot, and it is. All right. And you're unpacking it, and that string that you slowly start to pull on, quickly, like, you realize, oh, it's actually connected to my clothes, and all my clothes are coming off, and I was like, oh no.
And then you're all of a sudden the
what
emperor with no clothes.
Unraveling. Yeah. And you're unraveling that obligatory sort of feelings that you've had your whole life, and based in trauma, based in neurodiversity. And neurodiversity with trauma, it's like fuel to the fire. I must put on there, like, ADHD and autism. It's like, you can have trauma in of itself with neurotypicality, and it looks neurodiverse. It presents neurodiverse. Lived experience is neurodiverse for trauma, for CPTSD, for PTSD. But then you amalgamate those three domains, right? CPTSD comes later. But you have ADHD and autism. And ADHD is like pouring like gasoline on
It's high
on a
speed
fire.
jet fuel. It's not even regular gas. It's jet fuel, folks.
Exactly. It's jet fuel, and it will burn your bum. It will burn it. And I think this is the thing we need to realize, is that it's okay to not know. It's okay to be stuck. It's okay to not have any idea how to do it. But at least you know that now, that you can start somewhere. And that's the key thing, I think, knowing that you can do it. Just having that. So I guess what I would say is, maybe strike up an obligation that you're so good at doing for everybody else. Maybe strike up that one little obligation to yourself and think, have I done what I needed to do for myself today inside? Not outside where everyone can see, but just like, did I do a self-check? Did I do the right thing? As in, for me, was that what I really wanted? And sometimes you won't like the answers, but but you're at least convening with yourself and figuring it out. You're not letting things just react and happen.
Oh man, I think that right there is the gem. That's the insight. That's the golden nugget right there. And I think part of that is, as we talk about sort of unraveling and really looking at that. And I think it is taking time just to stop and ask yourself, What have I done that met a need I have today? And have I valued it? Have I honored it? And have I opened up and held space to receive it for myself today?
That
And
degree
a
of
lot of,
obligation is put it to yourself.
yeah, because I think, one of the things that sort of helps unbox and unlayer and I think unburden all that luggage that we put on ourselves externally and on ourselves internally is that most of the time, for most of us in late identify life, we have onboarded and been carrying luggage that is not ours to carry.
Onboarded, I love that. Where is the luggage gone? Like it's like that weird compartment of all these other people's luggage lost and found that like for me, it was like going onto a train. So actually, this is kind of funny. One of my little practices, meditative sort of practices that I like to help people get familiar with their mind is the train station analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I love this one.
I don't know if you know about this, but I did post a few times about it. But it's like, okay, if you're trying someone to get familiar with a train station, as in like the mind, I should say, you tell them to sit themselves on a train on a bench at the train station, and all your thoughts are trains moving past. Pew, 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 pew. And if you go down, you decide to hop on one of the trains, right? One of the thoughts, and you go down and you have a bit of a journey, right? Down that thought stream for a bit. And they're like, oh shit, oh, I'm daydreaming. Oh, quick. You get out the train, sit back on the bench, and then now the idea is that you're just going to keep trying to get back onto that bench. Now, for me, this is how I started to learn my internal self more and become more familiar. But I was also like, oh, there's that. Oh, lost and found. Oh, whose train is this? It's mine. And realizing that there was a lot of stuff there that I would have to unpack, right? But I don't have to do it all at once.
And you don't have to do it alone.
You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to do it either. It's okay to just leave it. You don't need to. Like, I think there's a bit of a degree of, oh, we must address the trauma.
No, we don't.
Actually,
we don't have to address everything.
No, you don't.
Some stuff resolves it by just letting it go.
Yeah. And also it can be more damaging. You don't need to relive everything. You don't need to do that to yourself.
Benjamin, I think that's one of the things that I recognize for myself. And I don't know if anybody else, and maybe if you, sounds like you may have, but it's like for me, because I am a visual thinker, because I can experience and put myself back in that moment where I smell it, I feel it, everything, I am there. For me to go back, it is more damaging because then it's just reinforcing what I already experienced. And it's leaving that loop open. It left that loop open for me. And what I discovered is that for myself and a lot of those really big T things, I had to find what was the closure and how did I just close that and let that go and know that I am safe. I am okay. And not have to I didn't have to unpack that because by doing that, it was only making it worse.
Well, that was your unpacking method for that very thing. I think a lot of people get stuck on this. Like, we've all grown up with the biomedical model.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to take a long time to unlearn.
I'm 48. It has been shoved down my throat.
It's disgusting over here too, how degrees of just how it's just everywhere and every little thing. There's compartmentalization where everything operates in isolation. And it's like, no, it all works together, guys. It's like, I can't believe it needs to be said. But just to remind you, that's what is actually the case. But, I think when it comes to just even like giving yourself a moment to deal with the trauma, it's just understanding, right, that you can, like you don't need to relive it. I have such a vivid mindscape. It's like a cinema screen, and you try and describe it to people. It's like if you could ever imagine walking into the largest cinema screen you ever had and you're actually in the movie. That's what I do. And it's sometimes it's like a wall coming towards you that you find yourself suddenly in this different world, and you're like, I wasn't ready for this. Like, where is
Wasn't
this
I just
coming
in the
from?
checkout line at Costco?
Yeah, like, hello. Like, and that's part of dissociation, you know, like it could be real some days how bad it was, but some days it's not just it's not dissociation, it's you living in this internal world. You're not dissociating, you're just there chilling out, right? And sometimes things bubble up that you are not expecting. Or sometimes you start to, because I would say as well, when you start to come into that awareness, that mindscape isn't a hellhole anymore. You're not reacting to it, right? It's not a sponge of all of the environment's hostility that then gets re-expressed internally as a hostile environment. When you start to have that awareness, you actually start to realize, oh, this is my mind. I can do whatever I want. But I think also there's these opportunities that, the body is also its own thing. It will tell that brain, hey, look, I've been holding on to this for some time and I would like to get rid of it, please. Like, and then you're like, oh, like I've experienced my first sort of, in the last 12 months, PTSD episodes, like proper PTSD episodes. And the first one, it was hard because I don't remember majority of it. All I remember was making someone that cared about me very distressed, and I was very confused and I did not understand what was going on. Now, if someone was like, what the hell is a PTSD episode? Just Google it. Go and have a look. It's awful to watch, but
yeah, it's awful to experience.
That's some of the things that we go through where it comes on. You don't have any choice. And then you don't even feel obligated then even to address it. It's there. So what do? And I think the biggest thing is just allow yourself to know that it wasn't your fault, but you're also designed in a way, you've developed in a way where you're almost obligated to think it's your fault. Like you're designed to think that, like, you think about social justice, right? Like for me, like I could be watching TV some days and see some things happening and I'm bawling my eyes out. Like, and I'm a crier. I'm a happy crier. Like, I don't care. Like, I cry. But to have distressing things where you don't feel like you're doing enough, and it's not even doing enough, you're not doing anything, or you're not doing something, or you're not, like, but you're a human and you can only do so much and you've got your own life and everything else like that. And that's what we deal with, that existential sort of obligatory, what should I be doing? And I'm here to basically say, whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. It's okay. And you'll find as soon as you give yourself permission to not feel obligated, to work through those, I'm feeling obligated to do this and I actually don't want to do it. Well, instead of doing that task now or doing that thing for that person, say it. I actually don't want to help. And that person will be like, oh, what's wrong with you? Or they're like, oh, that's okay. Or whatever scenario that comes about it. But you need to stick to your guns because that's what you want. And you're obligated to yourself, no one else. And I think that is the big thing for neurodivergent individuals, is that give yourself permission to be yourself. Don't feel obligated to everybody else to do what you think, because generally a lot of it's us trying to preempt the issues that we see coming. We're trying to preempt the needs of others by fulfilling them before they even come to you with a need. That obligation becomes so suffocating, all-consuming, because it just never ends. It's like a string that you keep pulling on and it keeps coming.
It is the infinity of need.
Yeah.
And guys, you hadn't heard me say it probably in at least one or two episodes, but I say it all the time, and this has become sort of the catchphrase. You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
You
You
don't
don't have
have
to.
to. Benjamin
You don't have
Christmas, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for sharing your germination
to.
and
Oh,
of
that's no worries.
obligation conversation, because I think this may have been exactly what somebody needed to hear today. And if
I
that
think
was you and you're listening or you're watching, and this has spoken to you and you have become aware of that germination of obligation in your life, Benjamin and I both want you to know, number one, you don't have to. Number two, turn inward and look at what are the obligations that I have to and should hold to myself first before I
Yeah.
do one more thing for starting at the end of February, we are going to have monthly support groups for all of the folks in our Unveilers community. That is people in our private coaching, as well as our first steps in the self-paced course. So if you are interested in joining any of that, take a look at the resources.mindyourautisticbrain.com. Check them out. You can apply for personalized coaching. And with that application, if everything is there and it's like, this is a really good match, and I know I've got some resources I can share, I will set up a 30-minute free consultation with you and share some information to help you on your journey based on the questions that you answer in that application for coaching. And that's just to kind of start the conversation to let me know what's going on with you, where you are. Because, guys, burnout, we feel it. And by the time we feel it, that's sort of where we become aware that burnout's happening in our world. So the burnout warning signs are the internal experiences that we have in burnout. There's another component that I teach and talk about, and that is the burnout warning signposts. So you've got your warning signs, that's your internal piece. Then you have your external piece, which are your burnout signposts. And most people think that, oh, it's the warning signs that let me know. That's how I identify I'm in burnout. Well, not so much. That's where you feel it first and you really start to notice it. But burnout shows up in the external signposts before we ever start to feel it. And that's where we can catch it. That's where we can start to make adjustments and awarenesses and shift things so that you don't end up with those warning signs. And make sure you go check out the top 20 warning signs, look at it, get started on your burnout restoration journey, be that through private coaching or the self-paced course to kind of get you started from where you are. Because guys, I want to help you get started. I don't want you to feel stuck. I don't want you to feel like I'm sitting in the suck and I have no way out, because I got a way out and I want to help you get there.